Hey everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, the show that asks which one of us is a vampire and which is the familiar. I'm Matt,
I'm Brian.
and we've already answered the question exactly. Brian, who between us would be the vampire and who would be the familiar on our show?
I don't know why, but I think out of the two of us, you give off more vampire vibes.
I do have fangs. I that used to like freak people out like that. A lot of you guys know I used to be a youth pastor, used to be a youth leader,
Mhm.
doing a lot of youth ministry. And there's like, it would never fail. Like middle school girls were always the one that would notice that I had fangs, would always point it out, and they'd always be like, oh, he's a vampire. Granted, I was a youth leader during the Twilight Saga years, so that
Mhm.
possibly was a part of it. But like I think they would point it out all the time. So like I just leaned into it because I've got really big incisors. So yeah, I'm a vampire.
I was thinking, I know it's not the same as allergies, but you know how like vampires, they have like the sunlight and the crucifix and the garlic and all that kind of stuff.
True.
Guys, Matt is like allergic to everything.
I am, but I do love me some garlic. However, it makes like so when I eat garlic, for some reason, it sticks with me for like 24 hours. Like it's not just my breath that smells bad, but like it ekes out through my pores. I don't understand. I'm like fully inundated with garlic when I just eat a little bit of it. So if I'm gonna eat garlic, then like I sleep in a hazmat suit so it doesn't bother Angie.
Yeah, like in a few weeks, Matt might we might be in the same place. Matt might be hanging out at my place. And so I told Matt I might have to unplug my air fresheners around my house because Matt's allergic to those.
I'll come in a little bubble. And, and we're recording this early May. And if you guys remember back in early May, it was like allergies kick your butt season. So, I have been sneezing and sniffling and runny eyes for the last week and a half. It's been great.
Yep.
That's the world you live in when allergies are a big part of your life. But we're not here to talk about allergies. We're here to talk about two TV shows that Brian and we still don't have a good name for this segment.
No. I think it's a running gag that we don't have a name for it.
Is that a running gag or is that just a thing that happens? Because there's a difference.
One turns into one.
Yep. So I gave Brian the TV show. So this is what we do. We trade TV shows that the other person hasn't seen. So I gave Brian the show What We Do in the Shadows. It airs on Hulu. I don't know if it's a Hulu original. I don't believe it is. No, it's FX, but FX has a deal with Hulu. So it airs What We Do in the Shadows. So he watched that, and Brian gave me. I still forgot what the name of the show was.
It's called One Day at a Time.
One Day at a Time.
And to be clear, yeah.
I couldn't remember what it was in our little pre-thing, and I didn't bother to look it up because apparently I don't do any preparation for this.
Did you at least look it up on Netflix to watch the episode?
I did do that preparation, yes. And my other preparation for this episode, when I gave you What We Do in the Shadows, I had only watched through like half of the first season, but I was really digging it. So in the last week, I have watched 2.5 seasons of What We Do in the Shadows, as well as continuing my many adventures of finishing up Gilmore Girls.
Mm-hmm. Which we will hopefully maybe stop talking about in a few weeks once we actually talk about that on the show. I'm excited to get into what Matt's thoughts are.
And that's the only time in history that phrase will be used.
Yeah. So, Matt, who should go first? Which show do you want to talk about first?
Well, why don't we take it one step at a time?
All right. So, to be clear, I had Matt watch the 2017 Netflix reboot of One Day at a Time, not the version from the 70s. Because actually, I was about in the second season before I even knew it was a reboot.
I said one step at a time, and it's one day at a time. You told me what the name of the show is, and I still forgot. This is how bad I am. This is the equivalent of you being like, hi, my name's Brian. Oh, Ryan, nice to meet you.
I thought that was a joke you made.
No. It's me thinking that was what the name of the TV show was. Still wrong. I want to watch that new show, Charles. You mean Chuck? Whatever.
Yeah. But if you see Stephen Tobolowsky and Rita Moreno, you're on the right show.
I did. I watched them. They gave off like I Love Lucy vibes, especially in this episode, especially like them cooking together in the kitchen. Just it felt very like 1950s, 60s picturesque type of relationship.
All right, Matt. So do you want to go through the episode first, or do you want to ask me any questions you have about the series first?
All right. So what is the name of it? No, I'm just kidding. So this episode of One Day at a Time was in the second season. It was, oh my gosh, what is the name of the episode?
Locked Up.
Locked Up. Thank you. I was going to say Locked Down, but I was really close. So in this,
or maybe it is Locked Down. Actually, no, you're right. It is Locked Down. I got it wrong.
Yes, I'm victorious, redeemed. So this episode, what we saw in it is we have Penelope getting all of the family out of the apartment. So it seems like, you know, it's one of those everyone under the same roof type of TV shows, except for their upstairs neighbor or whatever is Schneider guy. He lives somewhere else. So,
and also Dr. Berkowitz doesn't live with them, and then also the daughter's girlfriend doesn't live with them as well.
Oh, sure, but I mean that's close enough. But so Dr. Berkowitz, he doesn't live there with them.
No.
Yeah, that's surprising. Okay, so they're not married; they're just dating.
They're not actually dating. They are like exclusively platonic, is what it is. So,
okay, I'm all confused, but whatever.
No, it's just to explain the relationship. So Lydia is Penelope's mom, and she is, you know, has since said that, you know, the love of her life was her deceased husband, the dad Berto, and that no one could ever replace him in like a romantic sense. But she still enjoys the company of Dr. Berkowitz, who is actually Penelope's boss as well. And so they have a kind of an agreement, like they never do anything physical. They're not dating, but they spend time with each other all the time and act as if they're dating. And he's fine with this arrangement because he's one of those sad sacks where it's like his whole life is a mess, but he gets to be happy when he's hanging out with Lydia and the family.
Oh, like Ned Ryerson, that sort of character. Yeah. Stephen Tobolowsky, he kind of plays well, I can't not. He kind of plays sad sack characters, but he does it pretty well. So
yeah.
Anyway, going back from my confusion, in this episode, Penelope's trying to get everyone out the door because she wants her secret boyfriend, Max, to come over for some couples time. And then they all end up on lockdown because there's someone with some criminal with a gun outside, and they're all in danger, so they have to stay locked in their apartment. So everyone comes back inside after the boyfriend gets there. And so at first it's a little bit of I'm hiding the boyfriend because no one can see that. And then when they finally realize he's there, it's Schneider is there, and he's like, oh, this is my AA sponsor. And so kind of playing it off that way. So this is Max's way of being able to meet Penelope's family, Penelope's way of not being embarrassed about her family in the presence of Max. And then there is the B plot of her daughter, and what's her daughter's name? Elena.
I've seen the whole show and I blanked on the name.
Elena and Sid, with Elena trying to get to know Sid, but not wanting to like talk because she's really self-conscious and nervous about it. So that's the broad strokes of the episode, and then also kind of ends with they discover that trying to feel safe. There's conversation about like feeling safe, and that Lydia, I think, right? Yeah, Lydia has been keeping a gun in the apartment to help her feel safe, and Penelope has problems with that. So that's kind of where the episode ends, is talking on that and the resolution of that. So there's a couple things that it is it's dealing with here, or a couple of balls it's keeping in the air. This is a sitcom, 100%. It's like sitcom formula. It's that 4-camera type setup, and it's got laugh track. I don't know if it's in front of an audience or if it's just laugh track. My guess is just laugh track.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Because they don't do that anymore. TV shows don't, especially for no name show, so to speak, on Netflix. I don't see why they would feel the need to do that. So it is very sitcom-y humor, and that can be hit or miss. The jokes are fine for me. This isn't, I can, like, my big seal of approval here is this isn't my type of show. But I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it's so terrible. It's just, the jokes were fine, but I wasn't intrigued with the characters really at all.
Yeah, I get that. And this show, I mean, I like the ongoing storylines that they can have their goofy humor, but at the same time, they actually have some serious tones to them. Like, Schneider is your classic, like the goofy neighbor who comes over and acts, he's annoying and says things like, man, don't you hate when people barge into your apartment? Like, being oblivious to the fact that that's what he does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they do love him, and he's got the ongoing storyline of his sobriety and stuff like that. But the hit for me is anytime Stephen Tobolowsky and Rita Moreno, those two are so funny. Like, and towards the end, with Penelope convinces her mom to give up the gun to the police, and what she does is, when there's a helicopter looking for someone armed, she waves the gun out the window. We have a gun. Like, oh no, tomorrow. Like, that was my favorite moment of the episode.
Yeah, that was good. And then I like Stephen Tobolowsky's coward speech.
Oh yeah,
he goes on because, like, they're talking about like being strong, standing up to this guy or whatever, and Stephen Tobolowsky, of course, his character's the type that he's gonna run away, but then, like, he doubles down on it. He talks about, is like, for every famous person that has died, you only know about them because of a coward who ran away. And so he's like lauding the position of the flight mechanic in the fight or flight, which was kind of funny how he went into it. So yeah, I can see that, because those two are very strong. They're classic actors, and so for them to share the screen together, I can't remember if I said earlier this episode or not, but I was getting a little bit of I Love Lucy vibes from their back and forth when they're cooking together and that sort of. Although apparently they're not a couple, so I was wrong.
Well, unless you see some of the specific episodes where she basically says, like, we're not a couple, then you would absolutely think they're a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did. So take that, yeah. Netflix. This show too, I don't know too many. So this is, we talked about Netflix and some of the issues they had a couple weeks ago. And one of the issues with Netflix is, like, they'll throw money at any show, but I think it has to meet, like, this pitch. And I think the pitch for them was a mixed family, or, like, really specifically a focus on Hispanic. And I can't remember exactly. They said which country, and I can't remember. Cuban. Thank you. So like, to take this, let's start with a Cubanite family, and let's have that. I feel like that is all that Netflix would need, since they're trying to go for a more inclusive slate. And this show, it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, and for them to have inclusion of Cuban race isn't bad at all. But it's just another example of, like, well, this is a show that meets our criteria, so we don't care about the quality of it. We'll just go ahead and greenlight it. Now, obviously, this goes a little better than some of the other ones, but that's kind of where Netflix is at, is that they look for what's the inclusion factor? What is the pitch of this show? And if the pitch is like, oh, yep, we can get behind that, they'll throw money on it. And then I don't think that they'll do any oversight on it. So I feel like this is a show that, even though it's written fine and the jokes are fine, there's a reason I haven't heard of it. And I don't think that it's going to be, it's the third season now or something like that.
No, it's done. So they had three seasons. Okay. They started to do a fourth season that was on Pop TV that only lasted half the season. Then it got canceled with COVID, and it never came back.
Sure. And that's what I thought would be the case, is that not too long of a shelf life of this show.
They did the last episode they actually did an animated episode just because of COVID, and everyone could just send in their voices. And then that was kind of weird. And then they just never came back from that.
Yeah, that's an odd choice for the little bit that I've seen with this episode. Like you can do that with a show like Community or something
Mhm.
like that.
They
You
did
can
that on
work that around.
Community.
They do, yeah, exactly. You can make these workarounds, but
Yeah.
for a show that's more grounded, I
Mhm.
don't see how they would do that and then like kind of keep a straight face about it, you know?
Yeah, there was also that episode. It's not a crossover because they're not their characters, but they did bring in both Stephanie Beatrice and Melissa Fumero, who played Amy and Rosa on Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yep.
Both were in the same episode. It was like a big family reunion funeral episode, and they're all different extended family members.
I saw when I was looking at just some stills of the show, I saw that. I'm like, is that who I think it is? So I clicked on the still to make it larger. I'm like, yep, that's Melissa Fumero and Stephanie Beatrice. They're in it.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about what you liked about this episode. Why this episode versus others?
Well, there are a few episodes I could have given. I think this episode gives a good representation of who all of the family is. You know, with Penelope, she is very much a control freak, and so she had everything planned out. Everyone is going to leave, and she's going to have her time with Max, and then trying to put out fires and keep her secret, and just that's her. And you see the weird relationship between Lydia and Dr. Berkowitz. You see Schneider being all Schneider. You see how Elena is kind of all in her head, like she is a lot. And I'm not really sure what Alex was doing, but you know, he was there.
He didn't have an arc in the episode. He was just watching Elena and Sid as like their babysitter almost. And
Yeah.
then he was the one that spoke with Penelope at the end of the episode, but didn't really have growth for him at all in this. He was just,
No.
like I said, he was just there.
But there are other episodes that have arcs for him.
I bet.
When I do these things, I want to give an episode that kind of gives you your best visual of who these characters are. Like I feel like watching this episode, you kind of get the feel for who these episodes are. The other one I almost gave you was the family, as in, you know, Penelope, the kids, and Lydia all go out of town, and they end up meeting Penelope's brother, which it's one of the things where like they never mention that she had a brother, and then they have to backtrack because at one point in the series, Lydia had had a stroke and was in the hospital in a coma for a couple episodes, and they have to backtrack and like, oh well, why wasn't the brother there? And they have to help make that be a whole story. But then while that all was going on, back at their house, both Dr. Berkowitz and Schneider came over to like water the plants or whatever, and they're arguing over like, no, I should do it. I live close. No, I should do it. This, and then it's a great moment where Dr. B is like, but I have nothing else in my life. And then there's a whole montage. Those two end up just cooking together and hanging out and like having like bro time together in the family's house without any of them there.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, what we do in the shadows kind of also does a little bit of like I noticed it in third season where they'll like draw reference to something that they haven't referenced at all before. And I'm like, I feel like you can't just throw this in, even if you might have internally kept it in your mind. It feels weird to introduce it at this point.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I mean, it's if you like sitcoms, and I feel like it could be a show for you. It's one of those shows where it's not daunting to watch because I'm more likely to watch a show if there's like 3 or 4 seasons rather like, even though some of my favorite shows like The Office has 9 seasons, but just knowing like, oh, if I get into the show, I have to watch it for 10, 15 seasons. Like that's a lot.
Yes. Yeah, like 7 seasons of Gilmore Girls. But no, I'm not complaining.
Well, because no one asked you to watch the whole series. I could have given you like a highlight reel of episodes or something like that, but you're like, nope, I'm going to do it. So that shows
I'm going to do it right.
Your commitment.
That's so true, and especially the commitment for this episode. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, for what we do in the shadows, I watched all the seasons before we're going to talk about it, so that I can maybe reference some stuff that happens later in seasons. But all right, yes. Let's jump into your episode. Yours is pretty good. It's early on, so they're still establishing the characters, and that's another plus for us as an audience is we're getting to know these characters. There's also some plot development, plus there's some really funny stuff that happens in this episode. So tell us about episode 102, City Council.
It's basically Parks and Rec with vampires.
A bit, yeah.
So I was gathering around. So it starts out, there's 3 main vampires. With the guy, I'm going to call him Douglas, because that's his character name from the IT Crowd. Matt Berry.
Oh, Laszlo.
Yeah, because it's basically he's playing Douglas if Douglas was a vampire.
Yeah.
I didn't give you an episode that had him on it. I'm not sure if you've seen any with him in it, but that
I've seen clips, so okay. You're right in those clips.
Yeah, and then there's the main guy, and then there's the girl.
Nador and Nadia.
Nadia, and what's the other guy's name?
Nador.
Yeah. So I think it's funny. They're talking about how like they're vampires and they like virgin bloods. They go to they like spy on a D&D game. Like, they're full of virgins, and like those virgins are so pathetic that even the vampires don't want their blood.
Yep. There's this one episode later in a season where they bump into like one of Guillermo's old friends, and he's like uber virgin, and then like when he starts getting excited or whatever, he gets like a nosebleed, and Nador like almost starts like drooling as like the blood drips off and it drips onto the floor, and then he walks away and Nador just starts licking the floor.
That is funny. I mean, those are the kind of vampire jokes you expect in a show like this.
Exactly.
So Guillermo is like a familiar. So I'm guessing it's like they're human, so that like if they need to get something out during the day or something where they can't go, they send him out.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And also someone for the times too, because as you can tell, they are not with the modern era, and there's a lot of knowledge gap for where they're at.
Yeah. So they're talking about domination, and they cut to the scene where it's like they're unearthing a mummy, and like this other creature comes out. What was going on with that again? I was a little lost at that.
So that is the Baron, and the Baron is kind of like, in a way, their boss. There's not so much a hierarchy. They don't really get too much into it, but there is a vampiric council who oversees all vampires. And Baron is just like this classic old school type of vampire of like vampires should subjugate. So in a way, he's kind of like that, the expectations of a mother or mother-in-law, where it's like, this is how you should be. And like, well, we have to make them happy and do what they want, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So then they have the secret meeting where they're talking about gaining power and taking over the city. And let's see, like the girl Nadia, she starts yelling, and then like, be quiet, someone's gonna spy. And all of a sudden, it comes into Mark. Is it Mark Proctor? Is his name?
Yep.
What's his character's name?
Colin Robinson.
So Colin is like, hey guys, I was just spying behind the curtain there, and like they try to play it off. Like,
and he even uses the same terminology where it's just like, someone will be eavesdropping. Hey guys, I was just eavesdropping behind the curtains.
Yeah.
And whenever they say his name, they never call him Colin. It's always Colin Robinson. Every single time, Colin Robinson, the full name.
All right, let's all and keep with that all set. So Colin Robinson comes in, and they try to play it off like, oh, we were giving you a surprise party. And I expected the kind of characters that he plays would totally believe this. Like if you said that to Nate in the office, he would 100% believe you, no questions asked. But he was just like, no one would ever throw a party for me. So like very self-aware.
Yep.
And then he takes them to, it's like the city council. So I get some, I'm not sure what happened, because I didn't realize I thought he was another human until at the very end, like his eyes are glowing. And so is he a vampire?
He is, but he's an energy vampire, and he can go out in the day. And so as an energy vampire, he doesn't suck blood, he sucks energy. So by being as boring and off-putting and as painfully awkward as he can be, that saps people's like blood away. So, or their energy away. So I mean, like, he works at this office job, and at this office job, he's using all of these like everyone who works at an office job knows this type of person of just like, Mondays, am I right? You know, those sorts of things where it's like, it's so overused that it makes you die a little bit on the inside. So they play with that joke throughout the run.
Yeah. So he's basically like the entire cast of Office Space.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to, he brings him to a city council meeting. And of course, is it Nazor or Nador? Nador goes up and starts doing this speech. You know, it's kind of like his version of the Loki speech in Avengers was like, I am your ruler now. You must But instead, they're just like, we're talking only about zoning ordinances right now. So they don't react to what he says at all. They were like, if you would like to leave a comment or come to another meeting, and he's just like, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'd like to come to the next meeting where I can say all this. This little back and forth thing where they're like obeying by the rules, but just saying like, yeah, okay, where's the next meeting where I can come in, and then I will tell you that you're all my slaves. And this is it's a predictable dynamic, but it still works.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what's great about this show is I feel like the dynamic of this show is easily seen in this episode of them not quite understanding culture, them trying to have their own vampire lives in this culture that they're in, and it just doesn't quite work.
Yep. And then they try to manipulate them afterwards. So then Vampire Douglas goes, I'm just going to call him Vampire Douglas. Vampire Douglas goes to like, is she the mayor or like the head of the city council, and tries to charm her, and ends up finding out, oh, she doesn't like that raccoons are bugging her trash. So he gets all of the summons all the raccoons and kills them all and leaves a giant pile of dead raccoons on her deck in his mind as a nice gesture. And then she wakes up and she's understandably horrified by that. And then Nador finds out another guy in the city council, and we see him hypnotizing him.
Yep.
And then the girl, she goes back to like the original, like the one of the girls from the D&D, and it's like this awkward flirting thing where the girl thinks that it's like a college girl experience, but then she ends up turning her into a vampire. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's something that'll come back later.
Yeah. They end up really like dropping it after the first season, weirdly enough, but they have that storyline through the first season.
Maybe it's a thing where they were trying it out, and if it was really hitting, they would have kept it going.
Yeah.
So they go to the next city council meeting, and the main lady, she's talking about, is this like an act of terrorism, a gang thing, talking about all the dead raccoons, and he's, Vampire Douglas is sitting there like, what do you mean? Saying to himself, not to her, I gave you those as a gift. What's wrong with you? And then that's when the guy who had been hypnotized jumps up and just starts saying all this horrible stuff like, I'm going to kill you and hang your body from the lamppost, and like, we have to serve our masters or else they won't show us mercy, and just going off. And of course he gets taken by security, kind of setting up that I think it's going to be like a takeover of control, but I want to see this mundane humor keep going, because that's the draw for me.
It is, yeah, and that's what's great about this show is that continues through all the seasons. One of my favorite jokes happens in the third season of like mundane humor. They have a lot of cameos in this show. And so at the beginning of one of these episodes in season 3, Nadja's talking on a Zoom call with Scott Bakula. And the first thing we hear is him be like, well, I'm sorry that I couldn't help you with whatever this was. And then Nador comes in and is like, oh, is that Count Bakula? and Nadja's like, no, he's not a vamp. And he comes over and it's like, Count Bakula, it's nice to meet you. And it's like trying to treat him like a vampire. And she's like, he's not an actual vampire. I loved that gag that they did. It was a really funny sequence because they got actual Scott Bakula, and Scott Bakula is wonderful.
That's Chuck's dad, right?
Yeah, from Quantum Leap guy. If you don't know Scott Bakula from Too Much.
Okay, no, that's funny. That's the kind of jokes you would expect. Oh, I also forgot. There's also a sequence where they're on the bus, and what's it? Cliff, is it Cliff? What's his name? Craig Robinson?
Colin Robinson.
Craig Robinson is Daryl.
Yes.
Cliff Robinson. Craig Robinson. Colin Robinson.
This is the one step at a time, one day at a time, all over again.
Colin Robinson is just boring them to death. And all of a sudden, because the vampires, they turn into the bats. And he's like, well, joke's on them. They don't know where we're going. And it cuts to White Shot. They just are sitting on top of the bus. They just turned into bats to get away from him, but they still need to go where the bus is going.
And the thing about Colin Robinson is that he actually can draw the energy of vampires too. He doesn't too much, but every now and then, he'll still drain them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at the very end, when everyone's going crazy because that guy had been saying things, that's when you see Colin Robinson with his eyes glowing, his mouth is open, he's really sucking energy out. But my thought with that is, how does he not get caught? If that's the way he looks when he's sucking energy, how does he not get caught doing that in the office?
He only has that for like really intense like drawing of that energy. But then there also is a little bit of like the like because they're talking pretty loudly at the meeting. They're right behind people, even though they're supposedly talking to themselves. So it's like, yeah, the people would hear them in reality, but it's a TV show. So
yeah. So it's only the third time I've seen Mark Proctor in something. That I've seen it. I've seen The Office and then Better Call Saul, and now What We Do in the Shadows. And he's like the same. He definitely has a niche.
Yes,
but he does it very well. It would be weird to see him acting any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I selected this episode, at first I thought this featured Mark Prosh a little bit more, but it didn't quite as much after I rewatched it to make sure. It didn't feature him as much as I wanted, but still, he's good, and he's in like all the episodes, and so some of them he's a little bit more, but usually he's kind of about this much, that it's more about the other three and Guillermo.
Yeah, I think him and Matt Berry are the two most dynamic. Just because Matt Berry, he has this way of delivering lines that is just hilarious.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Guillermo, the actor Guillermo does a really good job too, because he's like our substitute, and so we're able to like identify with things with him. They give him more stuff in the second and third season that defines his character more than just the like token human who's observing all of this. But he really handles this like hidden sarcasm, this dry humor, and a bit of the like confusion of is this really what's going to be happening now? Is this the choices they're making?
Yeah.
He handles all that really well.
As well, I don't know for sure. I definitely would check out some more episodes. And then I think with Matt Berry. So there's an episode of IT Crowd with Matt Berry where he's at home and his doorbell rings and he has this stupid little dance. I can't really do it, but he's just like every couple of steps, like there's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door, and like he does that all the way. It's just like I would not be surprised if that was just something he made up on the day.
Yeah, I really have come to appreciate Matt Berry. I think he's like tremendous for vocal work, and so his vocal inflection of stuff is really good. But I mean, it translates into, of course, being a good actor. It's hard to be a good vocal actor without being a good actual actor. So he does a great job in his acting, but yeah, his vocal inflection of stuff is just so hilarious, and his accent helps, of course, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's all I really had about What We Do in the Shadows.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot in What We Do in the Shadows, and there's some really great cameos. There's especially one where they do this vampiric council where they actually come to the vampiric council, and they've got like 10 cameos in that episode. And some of them are like on the vampiric council are all of these actors that are essentially playing themselves. Like Wesley Snipes does a zoom into the vampire council because he's a day walker, and so he can be out in the day. But like it's Wesley Snipes as Wesley Snipes, and so he's like, and he has the spotty internet connection too. So that when they're doing their vampire council stuff, then he's like trying to keep up, and like he's delayed by 30 seconds or a minute on things because his stuff is buffering, and so he keeps popping up at wrong times. But yeah, this show is really good. It got a little weird and mystical in the second and especially in the third season, but it still has the humor. It just is a bit more story driven in the second and third, which I understand because in the first season there's a little story, but it's the same thing with the movie. The movie was a lot more of like the story is second based off of this concept. The whole concept is vampires in modern day and making these little puns and jokes. Like on the movie, one of the biggest jokes is like Jermaine Clement is like, "In here is where I do my bidding," and then it shows like the computer and he's on eBay. And so, it's this movie, this show had like the same thing. Even in this episode, when Nador is like calling out to this one guy on the council to hypnotize him, he's calling out into the ether, and Guillermo comes in and is like, "Did you call me, Master?" "No, I was calling into the ether." And then he goes,
Yeah, he's just like, when I call you, I'll just do regular yelling.
exactly. And so it's that sort of silly, like, that concept is where this shines. The story is fine, but I like the general concept. It's hooked me. So
Yeah. You said like it kind of gets more mystical. I think shows like this where it starts out where vampires are real, it kind of breaks the chain of what wouldn't be realistic. Like, oh, if vampires are real, then why not have a mummy or a werewolf or something like that?
Yeah.
If it's based, even Parks and Rec, it has its goofy moments, but like if all of a sudden a supernatural monster popped up, that would feel out of place and forced. Whereas like in a show like this, once you break that seal, it's like, well, then where do you draw the line of what shouldn't be allowed?
Yeah, exactly. And so they allow themselves to introduce all this sort of stuff. They do have an episode with ghosts, and I do find it funny that Nadja believes in ghosts, but Nador and Laszlo don't. And so Guillermo is kind of like us again, where it's like, you guys are vampires and you don't believe in ghosts.
Yeah, well, like there's an episode of. Did you ever watch Supernatural?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I haven't watched. I don't know why I quickly said yes. I haven't watched it. I'm familiar with it from a lot of different conversation with people.
Okay. Well, I've seen about the first half of that show, and at one point, I think it's like the third or fourth season when they first start introducing angels into the show. One of the brothers, Dean, is just like, no, like their angels are not real, and he's just adamant about it. And then finally, someone, I think the brother says, Sam says, what I've been thinking, like, how many supernatural creatures have you seen on this show so far? Why do you draw the line of angels? And it turned out it was like an internal emotional thing because their mom, who had been killed when they were little, always said that angels were watching over him. So that's why he was like so staunch against angels, even though the fact that they hunt supernatural things every episode.
Gotcha. Yep. Well, there you go.
So at this point, let's just go into trivia. Last week we talked about New Girl. And I talked about why did they start filming season 5 before they even knew they were going to get a season 5. And this isn't a very hard one. It's because Zooey Deschanel got pregnant. And they filming right away that we filmed some episodes before she started showing. And then that allowed them to prepare to get her off the show for a little while when they brought in Megan Fox. I mean, we both said last week that we both agree that season 4 was their strongest season. So yes. It's a pretty safe bet that they were going to get another season. So I don't think it was a huge gamble, but technically it was a gamble. And luckily they did get the season 5 and those episodes were able to run as filmed.
Yeah, which is great. And we mentioned how like that had happened, that she was pregnant in that season. And so like, I kind of actually put 2 and 2 together when you gave me the trivia at the beginning of the episode. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I know why now. So it's a good trivia though.
Yep. And then I had a trivia for this week, unless, did you have one?
No, you got it.
All right. So on One Day at a Time, we've talked about the actress who played Lydia, which is Rita Moreno, who has won several awards in her career. But there's one TV show that she was on as a guest star. And she is the only guest star in that show's entire run that won an Emmy for her performance in that show. So what show was it that she was the only guest star to win an Emmy?
The prequel to One Day at a Time, One Step at a Time.
Ah. Yep.
And I'm sorry that I ruined it for our listeners. You'll have to bleep that out.
No, of course.
Sounds good. Well, hey, it was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you have not seen either of these shows, check them out. What We Do in the Shadows is on Hulu, and One Day at a Time is on Netflix. So check those out. Or if you're like, I don't like those, I just want to watch IT Crowd again because I love Matt Baer in that, feel free. That's on Netflix as well. Supernatural is on something. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure you can find it. So
next week, it's finally happening. All this lead up to learning about Matt, to learning about Gilmore Girls, we're finally going to talk about our best moments. My cousin Tammy is going to come on, and we're going to talk about our best Gilmore Girls moments. It's going to be fresh in Matt's mind.
You gave that way more pomp than it deserved.
I think after like 10 episodes of you mentioning that you watched Gilmore Girls, and most of those times it was you bringing it up.
That's true. I did bring it up all the time. That's the new Muppet Show. But at least with this, like when I bring up Gilmore Girls, I'm not like, okay, let's derail and talk for about 5 minutes about. Although you don't do that with Muppets too much, but still.
No, I think the last time was a real derailment was when we were talking about Boba Fett and Jeff happened to mention he's a huge Henson fan, which you can't say that to me.
Yeah, that's just not fair. You can't dangle that little worm right in front. All right.
Yeah.
Well, make sure you tune in for that. If you are a Gilmore Girls fan, tune in. If you're not a Gilmore Girls fan and you just want to be like, I want to hear Matt's thoughts because he keeps hinting at it, but he hasn't really given me any thoughts except for the fact of, you can tell I'm not like, this is my favorite show. So that's the only thought that at this point. So feel free, check it out next week. It's going to be exciting. And if you haven't watched it yet, watch the new Kenobi series. That's has just come out. And so we'll be talking about that once it all wraps up as well. Should be pretty great. Anyway, until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.